Welcome back to another episode of Conversations with Cohen. I'm your host, Greg Cohen, a real estate advisor at Cressa. And as I'm doing all season, I'm trying to help law firms address many of the key issues that they're faced with. And with that in mind, bringing on the subject matter experts who are helping solve for those problems. So with that as the introduction, I'd love for David and Karen Skinner of Gimbal to introduce themselves to us.
Sure. So I'm Karen.
Obviously, I'm David.
And thanks very much for having us on. It's always great to talk to groups of lawyers about how they can make themselves really succeed and manage to be successful in the current environment. One of the things that we find is lawyers are really good at practicing law, but they're not necessarily so good at running and scaling their businesses.
That is 100% true.
Yeah.
So, whether you're a solo or a small firm lawyer, maybe you run a whole practice group within a large firm, there is just so much that law school didn't teach you. And we get that since Karen and I both practiced law for more than 20 years each.
Yeah. And so what we decided after seeing this lack of business skills and particularly some of the business strategies that have been so successful in other areas, we decided we would work on teaching lawyers the business and practice management skills that they need so that they can build successful businesses, but do that with less time and with a lot less effort. And when lawyers work with us, they tend to focus on doing the right work the right way. One of the things we really work on with our clients is how to improve their productivity and their profitability. So when they work with us and they really get focused on doing the right work the right way and using process, we talk a lot about process improvement, and we'll go through that as we go along in this podcast. But really what happens is their productivity and their profitability increase significantly when they start focusing on these things.
Yeah, the overall goal for us is to help lawyers become as great at running their business as they are at practicing law. So their practices do grow, as Karen said, in revenue, and they grow in reputation. And I think most importantly, Greg, particularly now where lots and lots of people are working from home, but it's endemic and pandemic in the practice of law. And I don't mean that in the COVID sense. We just tend to work a lot and very long hours. So it's important to us when we talk about the things that we do with lawyers is help them realize that they can be enormously successful and also have the time and the freedom to enjoy that success. And that sort of balance is really important. It's so often missing.
Yeah. And we say we, because we should probably give you a little bit of context. Both David and I practiced law for 20 years each. In large firms and small firms, you were in-house for half your career. I was a solo practitioner for part of my career. So we have, we get it. And we've seen how difficult it's been for many of our colleagues who are also our friends because we have, we've practiced for so long and we have friends across the profession in all different areas and all different parts of the world. So it's been interesting for us to see that. But when we come at this from the perspective of lawyers. We've seen how hard it is in the trenches and how hard it is to work as hard as lawyers do. We've worked 36 hours at a time. We've done those crazy hours as associates. We know what that's like. And so it's important for us to help lawyers find ways to practice better.
Yeah. So, go ahead. Sorry, Greg.
So what was your aha moment? What was the tipping point for you both that said, okay, you know what, this is something that there's a void here?
Well, I think the aha moment was just in the general sort of disconnect, in the sense that there had to be a better way to do what we do as professionals without having to sacrifice quite as much as we do. We spent time working, both of us, in large international law firms where, we just spent a tremendous amount of time trying to deliver great quality work to our clients. And that meant sacrificing a huge amount. It meant sacrificing dinners at home. In the UK, when we lived in the UK and I was practicing for a very large Magic Circle firm, I routinely got home in time to catch the 10 o'clock news for dinner. And we sat down and we ate dinner in front of the 10 o'clock news. And I left the house at 6 o'clock in the morning. So those are long days. Yeah. And I think that just over time, we sort of got worn down.
Yeah. And I have to say, there wasn't just one triggering event, but there were things like the time we planned a 2-week vacation to France. Now, we were living in Europe at the time, so it wasn't like we were crossing the Atlantic.
I knew you were going to bring this up.
We planned this 2-week vacation to France, And I went on the vacation. I was practicing, we were both practicing the same firm at the time, but I was fed up and I basically said, I'm going. But David had to work. So I went on my 2-week vacation to France with David's sister, who's lovely. We had a great time, but it wasn't the holiday that we had planned. And that's what kept happening. Too many of those, you miss those family vacations. You're like hiding. I like to say you're, hiding in the bathroom on your phone during the Christmas vacation or spring break, because you don't want your family to know that you can't actually take a holiday. So we got tired of that. There's got to be a better way. And one of the ways to do that, to find more time to, get over this overwhelm that so many lawyers work with, is to look really hard at operationally how you run your practice and take some leaves out of the business books and look at how you can make your practice operationally more efficient. It's not kind of the way that law firms grew organically, but it needs to be the way law firms grow in the future if lawyers are going to have any kind of a life.
I think one of the biggest struggles, Greg, is just, is time. Right. I mean, Karen and I both said we sacrificed time with family, time with friends, canceled vacations, showed up late for dinner, whatever it was, just didn't have dinner, had dinner on the fly. Time is a really big challenge.
Yeah. And you were going to jump in there, Greg. What were you going to say?
So I was going to say, so when we go to the inefficiencies,
Yes.
what's top of the list? Where do you start? Where's the low hanging fruit, if you will?
That's a good question, because the funny thing about law firms, what we have found over and over and over again, is if you go in with like with a set of business eyes, or you go in just as a third party, like you go in to help people out, and you start looking at the way that they practice, and you think from us now as consultants to go, we'll go for the low hanging fruit. What we find in law firms is that low hanging fruit is really firmly stuck to the branches. So what might be obviously low hanging fruit in another type of business, just because of the way law firms have grown, because of the way that lawyers are trained, because of all those reasons, that it's sometimes even hard to shift that low hanging fruit. But there is so much rotten fruit on the ground under your shoes that's where we say to start. And, you ask what that is.
So what does that look? Yeah. What does that look like?
So frequently it looks like lawyers doing things that it looks like the wrong people doing the work.
Yeah. I was just going to say,
that's the biggest thing.
Inefficiency for us. Let me rephrase it. So let's talk about what efficiency is, because then what inefficiency is becomes blindingly obvious. Inefficiency as we define it in the practice of law. Efficiency. Thank you.
That's why we work together.
Yeah. Efficiency in the practice of law, Greg, as we define it after years and years and years, it's really simple. And again, it's not rocket science, which is why we focus on the rotten fruit and nothing else. But it's getting the right people doing the right work, the right way, at the right time and cost, using the right resources. And I just want to be really clear here. Right resources doesn't mean that it's all about the shiny new technology butterfly. Technology is an important piece, but for us, it's process, then people. Once we get the process and the people really optimized, then we can ask ourselves the question, what do we have in our technology stack that we're already licensed to use, which we're not using to its full potential, so that we can automate things, systematize things, make things move more easily. So once we've got it optimized, then we'll use technology on top of that to drive it further along.
Yeah. So what I was going to say is really because of the way that a lot of law firms are set up, they don't have the right people doing the work.
Right.
So, we get asked this question a lot. What is one thing that you think should have happened differently? Well, if I could go back in time and I could look at the lawyers who were being advised to cut costs, who made the choice to cut support staff, that's where I'd want to go back to. And I'd want to change that, because one of the things that we think that we have seen happening over and over again is this cost cutting ends up being, rather than trying to get efficient and lower their cost of overhead by changing the way that they actually practice, by automating, by, training people to do things more effectively and efficiently. What tended to happen maybe about, 15 years ago, is there was this real trend to cut support staff. So you ended up going from having 1 or 2 lawyers per assistant to 4, 5, 6 lawyers per assistant. And I'm sure you've seen that with the law firms that you've been working with. But what happens there is you end up with attorneys who have to do more and more and more of their own admin and practice management work.
But it's a double-edged sword, right? Because because admins who used to be really integral to a partner or two partners' practices, they knew the clients, they knew the admin assistants at the clients. So if something was going pear-shaped, they knew how to get the client through their assistant. If something was missing at the 11th hour, they knew how to get it. Well, those folks have been forced to become generalists because suddenly they're not working for two people. They can't implicate themselves to the same degree when they're working for 5 or 6 people. So they don't get deeply involved in supporting the attorney's actual practice. And as a result, they don't develop the relationships that are critical, relationships that help move the
Deals
overall
forward.
efficiency forward.
Exactly.
Absolutely. And as a result, lawyers then, because their assistants don't know anything about their practice, I can't just say, hey, Greg, could you, generate that document 1 for client number 2? You know what to do because we did one last week. Because you probably didn't do one last week. It's probably been 4 months since you did one. And so the result is that they are stuck trying to sort out competing priorities across 5 or 6 different senior folks, or
often
maybe a
not
mix.
even in the same practice area, right? So that the assistants don't really get a deep knowledge of practice areas. We see this over and over again.
And then they also task switch all the time, and that affects the quality of their work and their reliability. They don't get things done on time through no fault of their own.
They're getting pulled in too many different directions, stretched too thin.
Exactly.
And so the consequence of this miscalculation that will preserve the higher cost jobs and sort of excise the support structure underneath us is the foundation has eroded. And a lot of lawyers, associates through to partners, find themselves doing a tremendous amount of basic business and administrative routine type work, and they're no longer delivering value to their clients.
It feels like it's like slippage of build time. You're doing an administrative task, so you can't bill an hour. So what's your time? So it goes back to what's your time worth?
Right. Well, exactly. And then what has ended up happening, I think, because of the pandemic, is it's made this even worse. So you're at a point where the lawyers they don't necessarily have, it's not as easy to say, okay, I'm going to just ship that word processing task off to word processing because word processing isn't in the same building. And
where is word processing?
And then also a lot of firms at the beginning of the pandemic made the choice to reduce costs because they were really concerned about what the impact of the pandemic was going to be. So they made the choice to cut costs by cutting their lower level, cutting paralegals, cutting associates, and cutting assistants. And as a result, you ended up with partners who were, and very senior associates doing all their own word processing, which is crazy. Lawyers should lawyer. They should be spending their time on value-adding legal service delivery. And
because that's the stuff clients will pay for.
Well, exactly. And as much as possible, and I know it's not always possible that they do none of it, but I do think as much as possible, they should not be, spending their time figuring out how to format their outline framed documents and their numbered documents in Word. They shouldn't spend time trying to solve their own IT problems. They shouldn't spend any time trying to do their bookkeeping or their HR. If you're a small firm or solo, you can outsource a ton of that. If you're in a larger firm, you should have the firm infrastructure to help you. But it's been difficult through the pandemic, and because of the way that, and because of the cost cutting. Like I said, 10, 15 years ago, there just aren't as many of those assistants to do some of that work. So you do end up with lawyers spending 30% of their day on billable work and the rest on that admin and practice management work.
So let me ask you then. So for the listener who this is resonating with, how do you come into the picture?
How do we come into the picture? So we do a number of different things. So we have sort of 3 pillars of what we offer. We have courses, we have coaching, and we do consulting. So on the courses side, if this kind of thing is really resonating with you, we actually have a course on delegation. It's the place we'd like to get everybody to start, because as lawyers have adapted to doing more and more and more of their own work, and especially if you're running a small practice or a solo, you may feel like you are the only one there to do the work. Then you're not delivering value. You're not delivering as much value as you could be. And you are spending your, as you said, your really valuable time that you could bill a client $300, $400, $500 for, or $700, $800 for,
or $1,800.
Yeah, or $1,800, whatever. You can bill your client a huge amount of money per hour, but you're doing work that somebody you could, that could do for like $30 or $40 an hour. So, we start with delegation. That's our first course that we suggest people start with to learn those strategies.
Because work and work allocation are probably the greatest source of inefficiency and waste, regardless of the size of the firm that you're in. So we start every project by having people, and we start Delegation Express, really the course itself, by having people understand sort of the 8 different ways that they're wasting time and leaving money on the table.
Yeah.
And we teach a very simple framework that helps people see their work differently and identifying what they're doing, which really they shouldn't be doing, and they should be delegating to someone else.
Yeah.
Right? Because when work shifts to the right level, then people tend to be more fulfilled in the work that they're doing. They don't feel that they're wasting their time on
nobody likes to feel like they're wasting time every
goofy
day.
task that someone else, who's better trained and who is faster at doing it should be doing. Mm-hmm. So people feel more fulfilled in the work that they're doing. They're delivering better quality work, and that generates greater revenue because they are leveraging their talent on the high capacity things for which people will spend a lot more. So a lot of money for. So number one is we've got courses, and Delegation Express is a really good example of where we're empowering people. Teaching people to fish so they can then do it for themselves.
Yeah. So we do that. We teach Delegation Express. We teach matter management, which is another really big one. Because if you're going to delegate work, then you have to figure out how to track that work, understand where it is. Again, it's been made more complicated with a lot of people starting to work remotely and then continuing to work remotely. So we teach strategies for really staying on top of and tracking work so that you keep everything on time and on budget, especially when people are remote, but even when they're in the same office. And then we teach our approach to what we call Practice Accelerator, the Practice Accelerator framework, which is really our approach to process improvement. And it's a very detailed step-by-step approach to process improvement. So how do you identify a process that is failing you or failing your law firm? How do you identify where the problems are in that process, map it out, understand what the root causes of that problem may be, and then improve that process and start implementing. So it's very much an implementation-driven program, but it teaches people the basics of how to do that.
It's all geared around a very simple framework. One thing that Karen and I are passionate about is teaching people simple, practical tools using easy to understand, easy to implement frameworks, because none of us have time to go out and get a PhD in anything anymore. We just need to kind of keep things moving, but in a way that is rational and economically reasonable. So that sort of suite of courses helps to get you there. And one of the things I think we're very proud of is that we offer an internationally recognized accreditation in legal process improvement. It's called the Legal Process Improvement Professional Certificate. And that comes under the auspices of the International Institute of Legal Project Management. And I don't know of any other course that is available that offers that sort of international accreditation. No. The goal there, Greg, is to take someone within your organization. Maybe they're a really high-flying associate, but they want to do more. They want to contribute more to the firm and sort of create a niche for themselves. And they're not just passionate about work, but they're passionate about organizational efficiency. And they're willing to take on the mantle of being the person who's going to move projects forward. So we teach them the frameworks necessary to corral the people around the greatest opportunities to drive productivity and profitability.
Yeah. And some people don't want to take a course. They want to have a lot more implementation and support along the way and accountability. So we offer coaching. And so we coach people through the Practice Accelerator framework. We have a group coaching program called Practice Accelerator, where we take people through the framework and we work with them for several hours every month. And then we have experts come in. It's a really very robust group coaching program. And then we also have law firm transformation coaching. So for people who really want sort of one-on-one support as they move right through from, knowing that there's something they've got to do differently in their practice, but not being sure what it is, right through their success path till they have a scalable and sustainable growing practice that they love that still gives them time. So that's the coaching.
If I can just riff on that sort of high value, high performing partners. And this is to your point, Greg, we have 2 clients. They work together. They run a highly successful practice group within an AmLaw 100 law firm. The challenge for them, though, and this goes back to my earlier comment about time, Greg, is in addition to the legal work and giving great legal advice to their clients, they are both stuck each doing at least 4 to 5 hours of unbillable practice management work on a daily basis.
On a daily basis, because
daily basis, not a weekly basis or a monthly basis.
It's what's happened with that firm. And it's the same with a lot of practice groups. And
it's also their most profitable practice group.
Hugely profitable practice group in this big firm. And the interesting thing is that practice group started out very small and was essentially a boutique. And then it grew and it grew, and it has this incredible book of clients.
And they brought in people through mergers. And so it grew.
So now they've got this large group, but they didn't develop the infrastructure to support the group as more of a corporate organization. So what's happened is they're still running like they're a solo with just these 2 partners, and everything funnels through them. Now that made sense when they were a little boutique, but they're not a boutique anymore. They're a huge firm. And
they're 25 people within their group within a very large
book
firm.
Of business. And so they cannot possibly run like that anymore. But it's typical what we see it over and over again, that these firms, nobody's making bad decisions as they go about how to set up their practice. It's just that these things grow organically. Right. And then they get entrenched, and they're just the way we've always done it. And so it's harder to change. And one of the things that we work with all of our clients, whether they're in that sort of situation or not, is you have to see the way you work differently. And we work a lot with our clients on looking at their tasks, their activities, the way that they practice through the optic of what adds value and what is waste. And how can we add more value and eliminate waste? And that runs through everything, through the courses, through the coaching, and then through our consulting, where we'll come in and work with a project team, work with a practice group to look at an underperforming process and take it from start to finish.
So this is the third pillar you're referring to. This is the consulting work.
Yeah. And we've been working with coaching with this group that David was talking about. But last week we did a big workshop with them. And one of the things we did was map out a process and do a little bit more kind of consulting. But with the consulting piece of what we do, we come in, we'll do an assessment of the practice. We'll look at what's performing well and what isn't in terms of practice groups or practice areas. And then we'll pick one and we'll say, okay, we're going to look at that from start to finish. We're going to say, we're going to define it. What do people need to get out of that process? And then how do you work now? So we have a series of 5 questions. So what do my clients need and want from the process? So that's sort of defining and the baseline. And then we look at how do we work now to deliver that result? And that's when we do a lot of process mapping. We don't have a process map on the wall right now, but we do a lot of process mapping. So step by step, who's doing what? And remember, we said at the beginning, one of the biggest issues is the wrong people are doing the work. As soon as you map out a process, you see right away who's doing work that they shouldn't be doing. And everybody sees it.
It's who's doing what work and how.
Yeah.
And then why.
Part of the problem with law firms, especially as they grow, and we saw that with the practice group, this high performing practice group we're working with, and pretty much every other firm, is we grow in little silos and we become very good at our own little area. And often we don't know exactly what the next person in the process does. A lawyer might not know exactly what a paralegal has to do, or the paralegal might not know why it takes so long to get that document back from the lawyer. And it's because the lawyer is spending time doing something that's important, but the paralegal isn't aware of it. So there's these silos, and the silos create a lot of internal inefficiency. We work hard with groups when we do process mapping to get everybody to see the work. When you can see how work flows, when you can see a process on the wall and where the bottlenecks are, where people experience frustration and where there are errors constantly being made, suddenly people have a much greater appreciation of where they fit in that. The silos get completely broken down and you get a lot more creativity when you start redesigning, how could we make that better?
There's a lot better understanding. And I think one of the things that Karen is driving home without saying it is the making work visual both through mapping and making work visual through something like a Kanban or a matter management board, makes it much easier to make very quick judgments about where matters stand, where the bottlenecks are, who's doing a task that perhaps they shouldn't do. And the reality is the brain processes information, visual information, 60,000 times faster than it does if it's in writing. So we're constantly encouraging our clients to roll up their sleeves, grab Post-it notes and grab pens and start to write things down and just throw them up on the wall, map them out, and then organize them visually. It has a huge impact.
Yeah. I mean, we have a great, go ahead, Greg.
I was going to say, I would imagine a big struggle you have with your clients is people feel like they're on this treadmill and they're just, and they're running. So like, how do you stop the treadmill and get off for a moment to take that breath? Because if you're not, it's almost like the water's flowing, right? And you're taking this bucket and you're trying to move it and you're trying to catch the water and then move it. Yeah. If you don't take the bucket and catch the water, all that water is going to fall on the floor. So you're scared to stop because that's just the way it's going, right? So like
the way we've always done it.
Yeah.
Well, so another way to put what you just put, Greg, is what a good friend of ours from Texas, she's a senior partner in a very large Texas law firm, says, because we talk about this with her all the time, relentlessly, and she's so passionate and so interested, but her complaint is, I'm just so busy cutting wood that I don't take the time to stop and sharpen my saw. Intellectually, she knows very well that a sharp saw would lead to much greater productivity, much greater profitability, and a lot less effort, but she just can't get off that endless cycle, that treadmill of, I'm just trying to catch up. I'm just trying to catch up. I'm just trying to catch up.
And what's your response? And so what's your response to her?
So what we do with people who come at it like that with us is we say, look, let's start with something really simple. Let's find the time. So let's find a couple of hours where you can actually dedicate yourself to sharpening that saw or catching that water in the bucket, whatever it happens to be. And so we start with some delegation strategies. That's why one of the sort of first points of contact we try to focus people on is to take that our intro delegation express course, because once they learn to delegate, then they can free up some time. And that delegation doesn't have to be to, another person. We're not saying they have to hire somebody full time. There are lots of strategies that we teach in that program that just allow people to free up time. And once they've freed up some time, then they have a bit of breathing space, and they can then spend some time really thinking about what else they want to do to their practice, how they really want to move to the next level, how they want to focus on working smarter, not harder.
Right.
We also are really open with people. Process improvement does take time and it does take effort, but it is an investment. And even the small changes that you make can have a really big impact over time. One of the books that I've read recently that really we recommend it to everybody is Atomic Habits by James Clear. And the whole idea there is tiny little 1% changes. Make yourself 1% better every day, 1%. And if you keep doing that, it will add up like compound interest. We run into, one of the objections we run into a lot is, we can't do that because it's just too big a change, whatever, the partners won't go for it. But if you can break down what you're trying to achieve into little pieces, if you can save yourself, if you can save a minute off a task you're doing 5 times a day, and there are 5 people in your office who do that task, then over the course of a year, even like a regular 40-hour work week, you're saving 2.5 weeks a year.
I don't know many lawyers that work regular.
And everybody works more than that. Exactly. So if you can break things down and make tiny changes so that it doesn't feel like you're putting in a huge amount of time and effort, those tiny changes will add up over time. So we do get people to try to focus on those small changes. That's why we said the rotten fruit at the beginning, the easier stuff to fix.
One of the reasons that's so important and we're so fixated on it ourselves is because time is a precious resource. You can't invent it. You can't get it back. And so we want people to see the benefit of investing the time that they are committing quickly with success and quickly. So we do go after the rotten fruit. And we encourage people to focus on making those small iterative changes for a variety of reasons. They get the benefit very quickly And other people who are watching from the outside, the doubting Thomases and the doubting Jills, watch and see the performance improve, and they can see themselves in those benefits. And it's easier to build the buy-in that is necessary to get more people to participate in the next project, which may be just a little bit more challenging and require a little bit more effort. But if you go about it by attacking the low-hanging fruit or the rotten fruit first, you can build the buy-in that is necessary to create a sustainable approach to process improvement that will start very quickly to generate significant and material benefits, both in terms of productivity and profitability, but most importantly, in terms of the economically efficient and effective allocation of limited resources, being the people and their brains.
Yeah. I have a great example do we have time? Because it's a good one. Okay. So one of the law firms that we worked with, we were working with their real estate group. And this real estate group did a lot of condo conveyancing. So they represented a lot of builders, and then they would do the closings for all these condo projects in their office. And they were doing, at the time we started working with them, they were doing 1,800 of these closings a year, and they were moving up to 3,000. That was their target. And they had another lawyer coming, and they were going to be doing 3,000 of these closings a year. In the jurisdiction where they were practicing, it was required that the lawyer see and check the ID of every purchaser.
Photo ID, government issued photo ID.
So what would happen is the purchaser would come in, the lawyer would go and meet them, sit them down in a conference room, give them some papers to fill out, and then the lawyer would take their ID, and the lawyer would go off to the photocopier and then photocopy the ID and then save a copy into the file and then come back. And all of that was taking about 15 minutes. And because there was time waiting in line for the photocopier, and then there was whatever, it was taking them about 15 minutes. But these are lawyers that could bill $600-$700 an hour, right, and they were photocopying because that was the way they'd always done it. And we said, well, okay, why do you have to photocopy? And well, we have to see the ID. And I said, okay, well, what if the receptionist checked the ID? And they're like, oh no, the lawyer has to check the ID. They said, well, what? We're like, well, what if the receptionist could scan the ID? It actually
started back. What if they gave the photo ID to the receptionist when they came, and the receptionist, made the photocopy? And the answer is, well, we could never have, our receptionist is so busy, we could never afford to have the time to let the receptionist wander off to the photocopier. And we're thinking, well, hang on a second here. Whose time's more valuable, yours or the receptionist's? And then we were like, well, let's put a desktop scanner on the receptionist's desk. There's plenty of space. So they were like, okay. So then we rejigged that process so that the purchaser arrives, gets greeted by the receptionist. The receptionist takes their ID, copies it, scans it directly into the file, notifies the attorney that their purchaser has arrived. Then the attorney arrives. The photocopy is already being done right at their desk. No one had to leave the desk. The receptionist could still answer the phone, but the receptionist then hands the ID back to the lawyer. The lawyer checks it, gives it back to the purchaser as she's greeting the purchaser, and then they go off. So the lawyer has saved time, 15 minutes of time for 3,000 transactions a year, which is a huge amount of time for the cost of a desktop scanner. What's amazing about that particular anecdote, and not a word of a lie, it is absolutely true, is it embodies so many of the different mindset shifts that really go to making this effective, right? I mean, the idea of we can't do that because being replaced by we could do that if, it had never occurred to them that the receptionist could do all that was required to be done to this photo ID if they just empowered him with a desktop scanner worth $200 that plugged in right beside it. To them, the corollary was, well, if the partner goes to the photocopy machine, the receptionist has to go to the photocopy machine. And we're so busy, we can't do that because the receptionist can't be away from his desk. Well, why don't you just bring the photocopy essentially to him at his desk? Yeah. And that mindset shift just never occurred to them. And then that small incremental change in savings in time, this is flat fee work. So taking the partner and having her spend 15 minutes doing something that, anybody could do. They don't even have to be receptionists. They could be a court runner, someone from the mailroom. It didn't matter. Had a significant impact on the profitability of the group. It sounds silly, but take 15 minutes of partner time and multiply that across 3,000 transactions in a year. And you're talking about a fair amount of money being lost just because people hadn't thought outside the box.
Yeah.
And I tell you, it wasn't a very complicated box to think outside.
No, and what I think is really interesting too about that one is that that was part of a project in the real estate group. And then we were back just at the end of last year to do a project with their wills and estates group. And we mentioned this to the wills and estates group because one of the parts of their process was photocopying the ID. And we said, well, doesn't Josh do that at the reception for you? And they looked at us like we were nuts. And we said, well, he does that for the real estate group because that's how we set it up when we left the last time. And they kind of went, oh my God, these law firms are such silos. And one of the things about our work with law firms is we focus a lot on breaking down those silos. So by the end, we had the real estate group talking to the wills and estates group, and then the receptionist saying, of course I can do that for you. It's no problem at all. So right away, we had an instant quick win, and it didn't cost them a thing because they actually already had the desktop scanner and the process in place. So that's always a good example.
So let me ask you, so if this has resonated with people who are listening, how do they get in contact with you?
Oh, it's really easy. I'm sure you can see the name on the screen is Gimbal. That's the name of our company. You can send us an email. You can email me, Karen@gimbalcanada.com or David@gimbalcanada.com, or you can go to our website, which is Gimbalcanada.com.
Just be careful that it's Gimbal and not BLE. Yes. Gimbalcanada.com. And you'll find us there.
Yep.
You can sign up for our tip of the week, where we provide practical, actionable tips and tricks on things that people can do right away to make a significant difference in how they practice.
Yep. And all those tips of the week are also on the website every day, every week they get updated. So there's a ton of resources on the website for people to look at. And then there's also, there's Delegation Express. And for that, it's super easy. You just go to delegationexpress.com. And it's all one word, delegationexpress.com, and that'll take you right to the course. And it's on sale this week. It
is actually on sale this week. You're right. If I could sort of summarize, because I do think we've covered a lot of ground and we've done it in a fairly disparate conversational manner. I think what I would say, Greg, is that we know from our experience that firms that have the high achieving growth over a sustained period of time, they generally share two key characteristics. They obsessively work on delivering the best possible experience to their clients from the very first touch. That means from the moment they pick up the phone and call and get the receptionist, or from the moment they step off the elevator. The receptionist is often the very first people these people come in contact with. So your receptionist needs to be top drawer. And he or she needs to be a consummate greeter of people, conversationalist, and an excellent salesperson who knows what the firm does, who understands sort of the common messaging. And then they are also laser focused on being efficient, right? They seek to improve utilization rates by having the right people do the right work, the right way, at the right price and time, using the right resources. And that's a lot of rights, but it's not rocket science.
Yeah. And when you focus on efficiency like that, you're going to see a lot more productivity. You're going to see a lot greater satisfaction for the lawyers because they're getting more done in less time. And burnout and overwhelm is one of the major factors affecting lawyers right now. And there's a lot being written about attorney mental health. So ways that you can reduce burnout and the risk of burnout for your attorneys is really important.
And it's not just lawyer satisfaction, but it's client satisfaction too.
Right? It's also going to help with revenue because you're not wasting your resources. Right. So you're able to generate more money in less time, and it'll give you a lot more time across the board.
So if you're a law firm leader and you're listening to this podcast with Greg, then here's what you need to know. If you can reduce the waste, the frustration, the friction in your law practice, that is the most powerful and strategic way that you can grow your income, improve your reputation, and deliver great service in less time and with less effort. And ultimately, that is what we think is really important. It's about focusing on working smarter, not harder, and on delivering a phenomenal client experience with top value for your clients.
Yeah. And that's really it. That's the bottom line. Working smarter, not harder. And, every time, one of the things, it's really easy, but if you just start getting people to think every time they finish a task, what could I have done differently to deliver that same quality work in less time and less effort? Was I the right person? Did I have the tools? If I wasn't the right person, then who should have done it? But really, it's that basic question. What could I have done differently to deliver the same quality work in less time and less effort?
And it's not rocket science.
Nope.
If people want to get started, they should grab a cup of coffee or some mineral water or some tap water or whatever is their joy and sit back and reflect on their day and ask themselves, what did I do? How could I have done it differently to get the same result with less time and less effort? Yeah. And really what it boils down to is asking yourself, what's taking longer than I think it should?
Yeah.
Or is more complicated than I think it needs to be? That's all they have to ask. What's taking longer than it should, or seems more complicated than it needs to be? Because there's an opportunity to improve.
Well, Karen and David, thank you so much for taking the time, sharing your experience and your knowledge with us. I feel like we could go on for a lot longer.
We can talk about this stuff forever.
But I really want to be conscious of your time and your value of your time. So thank you very much. This is Greg Cohen. This has been Conversations with Cohen. And if you have any questions or you liked what you heard and want to subscribe, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you next time. And thanks again so much for your time.
Our pleasure.
You're most
Thank
welcome.
You.